Mummy is lying. The words ripped through the courtroom like a thunderclap. The judge, a stern-looking man with silver-rimmed glasses and a gaze as sharp as a blade, froze in the middle of his sentence. The gavel he had raised midair never struck the wooden block. The entire room fell silent. Every eye turned toward the teenage girl standing in the middle of the courtroom, her hands balled into fists, her chest rising and falling in sharp breaths. Her voice had cracked with emotion, her face was pale, and her wide brown eyes burned with something fierce, something desperate. The woman standing at the witness stand, dressed in an elegant navy blue suit, shifted uncomfortably. A single bead of sweat rolled down her temple. "Madison," she hissed, her voice a sharp whisper. "Sit down." But the girl didn't move. Instead, she lifted her chin and spoke again, this time louder, her voice shaking with both fear and determination. "My mom is lying. She's not telling the truth about what happened. Please, you have to listen to me." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The jury members whispered among themselves. The judge's face darkened. "Order." The judge's voice boomed. He finally brought the gavel down, the sharp bang echoing in the heavy silence. "Young lady, do you have any idea what you're doing?" Madison swallowed hard, but she didn't back down. "Your Honor," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "If you let her keep talking, someone innocent is going to get hurt. I can't stay quiet anymore. I have to tell the truth." The judge peered at her over his glasses. "And what exactly is the truth?" Madison opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say another word, her mother turned pale as a ghost. Then, she fainted. 2 weeks earlier, the summer heat clung to the air as Madison stepped off the school bus and onto the pavement in front of her house. She could already hear the familiar sound of birds chirping in the oak trees that lined the driveway. Today was supposed to be a normal day. Madison was a girl who never liked standing out too much. At 17, she was quiet but observant. She didn't have many friends, but she didn't mind. She was always the type to notice the things that others overlooked. And today, something was off. The moment she walked through the front door, she felt it in her bones. Her mother, Lisa Bennett, stood in the kitchen, pouring a cup of coffee. The smell of roasted beans filled the air, but Madison barely noticed. Her mom was wearing makeup. Lisa never wore makeup unless she was going somewhere important. And her hair, it was curled, perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. That was strange, too. Her mom never got dressed up like this. "Hey, Mom," Madison asked, placing her backpack on the chair. "Are we going somewhere?" Lisa turned, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "No, sweetie. Just had a meeting earlier." "How was school?" Madison hesitated. "Fine." Something felt off, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Lisa had been acting differently for the past few weeks. Distracted, nervous, always checking her phone. And sometimes, Madison would wake up in the middle of the night and hear whispered conversations coming from downstairs. A few times, she even thought she heard her mother, crying. Madison wasn't the type to snoop, but something in her gut told her that whatever was going on, it wasn't good. She didn't press her mom for answers that day. Instead, she went upstairs, did her homework, and tried to push the weird feeling away. But that night, when the house was quiet, she heard it again. The hushed voices, the sound of her mother's feet pacing back and forth in the kitchen. And then, a single sentence, a single whisper that made Madison's stomach drop. "He can never find out the truth." Days passed, and the feeling only got worse. Lisa became more and more distant. Her smiles felt forced, and she jumped every time the phone rang. Madison knew something bad was coming. She just didn't know what. Until the night she found the letter. It was buried under a pile of papers in her mom's desk. She hadn't meant to see it. She was just looking for a pen. But once her eyes landed on the words, she couldn't look away. It was a court document, and her mother's name was on it. Madison's hands trembled as she read. It didn't make sense at first, but as she pieced the words together, a sickening realization formed in her mind. Her mother was preparing for something big, something legal, and it wasn't just about her. It involved someone else. Someone Madison didn't even know. The day of the trial arrived faster than she expected. Lisa had tried to keep Madison out of it. "Stay home," she had said that morning, brushing her daughter's hair behind her ear like she always did when she was trying to be gentle. "It's just some legal stuff. Nothing you need to worry about." But Madison didn't believe her, and she had followed her mother to court anyway. That's how she ended up sitting in the back of the courtroom, listening as her mother took the stand. Watching as her mother, the woman she had always trusted, spoke words that Madison knew weren't true. Every sentence felt like a knife. Every lie felt like a slap. Madison's heart pounded as she listened. Her mother was lying. Right there. Under oath. In front of everyone. And the more she listened, the more she realized. This lie wasn't just words. It could destroy someone's life. Madison couldn't take it. Her fingers clenched the edge of her seat. Her breath came in fast bursts, and before she could stop herself, she stood up. Mummy is lying. The courtroom froze. And in that moment, Madison knew. She had just changed everything. A heavy silence filled the courtroom. Madison's words still hung in the air, echoing in the minds of everyone present. The judge, his face unreadable, stared at her with piercing eyes. The lawyers exchanged glances, and murmurs spread through the jury like ripples in a pond. But the most terrifying reaction came from her mother. Lisa Bennett's face had gone pale, her lips slightly parted as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Her entire body seemed to tremble, and then, before anyone could react, she collapsed. Gasps filled the room as Lisa crumpled to the ground, her body limp against the polished wood floor. "Mom!" Madison's voice cracked as she rushed forward, but before she could reach her, 2 security officers were already there, kneeling beside her mother, checking her pulse. "Call 911, someone shouted. A lawyer, a woman with short blonde hair, immediately pulled out her phone and dialed. The judge banged his gavel once more, trying to regain control of the chaotic room. "Everyone, remain seated." His deep voice boomed. "This court is in session. Order." I said order. But Madison didn't care about the gavel. She didn't care about the rules. She only cared about the woman lying motionless on the floor. She pushed past the officers and dropped to her knees beside her mother. "Mom, wake up," she whispered, shaking her gently. "Please." Lisa's eyelashes fluttered slightly, but her eyes didn't open. Her breathing was shallow, her face ghostly pale. Madison felt a lump rise in her throat. Was this her fault? Had she pushed her mother too far? The thought made her chest tighten, but deep down, she knew the truth. Her mother had been keeping a secret, a dangerous one, and whatever that secret was, it had been too much for her to handle. She gripped her mother's cold fingers and whispered, "I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom, but I can't let you lie. Not about this." And then, like a cruel twist of fate, Lisa's fingers suddenly twitched in Madison's grasp. She opened her eyes, but instead of looking relieved to see her daughter, she looked terrified, and then she whispered, so quietly that only Madison could hear, "You don't know what you've done." 3 weeks earlier, Madison had always believed her mother was a good person. Lisa Bennett was the kind of woman who always stopped to help an elderly neighbor carry groceries. The type of person who left warm cookies on people's doorsteps for no reason at all. She was kind, honest, someone who never broke the rules. At least, that's what Madison had always thought. Until the night she saw her mother crying in the kitchen. It was past midnight, and Madison had woken up thirsty. She tiptoed down the stairs, expecting to find the house dark and silent. But instead, she saw the dim glow of the kitchen light and heard quiet sobs. She stopped at the edge of the hallway. Her mother was sitting at the table, her shoulders shaking, her head buried in her hands. In front of her was a small glass of water, barely touched. Madison had never seen her mother like this before. A strange feeling crept up her spine. "Mom?" she finally whispered. Lisa jerked up, startled. She wiped her face quickly and forced a smile. "Oh, Maddie, sweetheart. What are you doing up?" I heard you crying." Lisa shook her head and stood up. "No, I'm fine. Just tired, that's all." Madison didn't believe her. But she didn't press. Instead, she asked, "Is something wrong?" Lisa hesitated. For a split second, her mask slipped. Just enough for Madison to see something beneath the forced smile. Something raw. Something scared. But then, just as quickly, the mask was back. "Of course not, sweetheart," she said gently. "Everything is fine." But it wasn't fine. Madison could feel it. And as she watched her mother rinse out the glass and turn off the kitchen light, she made a decision. She needed to find out what was really going on. The next day, Madison started paying closer attention. She noticed little things she hadn't before. Her mom was always on edge, jumping whenever the phone rang. She locked her office door more often. She made secret phone calls late at night. And sometimes, she would disappear for hours without telling Madison where she was going. One evening, Madison tried asking again. Mom, is something wrong? Lisa sighed. Maddie, I told you. Everything is fine. But it doesn't feel fine. Lisa set her coffee cup down with a sharp clink. She turned to Madison, her expression serious. Listen to me, sweetheart, she said softly. There are some things in life you don't need to worry about. Some things you're better off not knowing. Madison felt her stomach twist. What does that mean? Lisa gave her a sad smile. It means I love you, and I'm protecting you. The night before the trial, Madison made a discovery that shattered everything. She had snuck into her mother's office while Lisa was out running errands. She knew she shouldn't. But the locked drawers, the whispered phone calls, the fear in her mother's eyes. She had to know. She found the key hidden inside a book on the shelf. Her hands trembled as she slid it into the lock. The drawer clicked open. Inside, there were papers. Lots of them. She picked one up and started reading. Her pulse quickened. Then she grabbed another. And another. Each document revealed something more shocking than the last. Madison felt dizzy. She couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a lie. A huge, terrible lie. One that could ruin someone's life. Or worse. She dropped the papers, her fingers shaking. She thought she knew her mother. But now, staring at the evidence in front of her, she realized she had never known her at all. Back in the courtroom, Madison sat frozen beside her mother's unconscious body. Lisa had said she didn't know what she had done. But Madison did. She had just exposed a secret that could change everything. The ambulance sirens wailed in the distance. And as the courtroom doors burst open and paramedics rushed inside, Madison clenched her fists. She didn't care how much trouble she was in. She didn't care how scared she felt. She had to see this through. Because if she didn't, an innocent person might pay the price. The paramedics worked quickly, their voices urgent but controlled. One of them, a tall man with dark hair, pressed 2 fingers against Lisa's wrist. Pulse is weak, he muttered to his partner. Ma'am, can you hear me? The female paramedic asked, tapping Lisa's cheek gently. Lisa groaned, her eyes fluttering open. Madison's heart pounded. Mom. For a second, her mother's gaze found hers. There was something raw in her expression. Not relief. Not gratitude. Fear. Lisa swallowed hard, struggling to sit up. I don't need a hospital. I'm fine. The paramedics exchanged looks. Ma'am, you fainted in the middle of a trial. We need to make sure you're stable. Lisa shook her head. No hospitals. Madison frowned. Why was she refusing help? The judge leaned forward, his patience clearly running thin. Ms. Bennett, if you are medically unable to continue, we will have to postpone this hearing. Lisa's head snapped toward him. No, the trial must go on. Her voice was sharp, desperate. She turned to the paramedics. Please, I just need a moment. The tension in the room thickened. Madison sat frozen, staring at her mother. The woman who had kissed her goodnight every evening. The woman who had baked cookies in the fall and taught her how to ride a bike. That woman was now fighting desperately to keep something hidden. But what? Lisa's fingers curled into the fabric of her skirt. I can continue, she said finally. The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. Very well. He turned toward Madison. His voice was firm, but not unkind. Young lady, you've caused quite the disturbance. I'm giving you one opportunity to explain yourself before we continue. What do you mean by saying your mother is lying? Madison swallowed hard. This was it. The moment she had to decide, stay silent or expose the truth. She glanced at her mother again. Lisa was watching her closely now, eyes pleading. Don't do this, Maddie. But Madison's gut twisted. She couldn't ignore what she had found. She squared her shoulders. She had to tell the truth. I saw the documents, she said, her voice shaking. I know everything. A sharp gasp echoed from her mother. Lisa's hands clenched into fists, and for the first time in Madison's life, she looked angry. You went through my things. Lisa's voice was quiet, dangerously so. Madison lifted her chin. I had to. The judge tapped his fingers against the desk. What documents are you referring to? Madison hesitated. If she said the words out loud, there would be no turning back. But then she thought about the innocent person being accused, the life that could be destroyed. She took a deep breath and forced the words out. She's lying about what happened to Mr. Calloway. The room erupted. The prosecution lawyer shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. This girl is not a witness. The defense attorney, a man in his 40s with a calm but piercing gaze, spoke up. Your Honor, If this young lady has information relevant to the case, we should hear her out. The judge held up a hand, silencing the chaos. He turned to Madison. Do you understand what you're saying? Do you understand that this is a legal proceeding and lying under oath is a crime? Madison nodded. I understand. Lisa's breathing was shallow. Madison, please. But Madison didn't stop. I found the letters, the transactions, the emails. Her voice cracked. She's trying to frame him. Lisa gasped. Madison. But it was too late. The words were out. The room fell into stunned silence. Madison gripped the edge of the witness stand to keep herself steady. The judge's gaze darkened. Bailiff, he said, his voice steady. Retrieve those documents from Ms. Bennett's home immediately. Lisa shook her head violently. No, you can't. The bailiff was already moving. And Madison knew. Her mother's secret was about to be revealed. 2 weeks earlier, Madison had always thought of Mr. Calloway as a quiet man. He lived 2 houses down, kept to himself, and rarely spoke to anyone. He was old, probably in his 60s, with graying hair and kind blue eyes. She had never thought much about him, until she overheard her mother's phone call one afternoon. She had been walking past her mother's office when she heard it. The hushed, panicked voice. The sharp sound of papers rustling. She stopped in her tracks, pressing herself against the wall. Lisa's voice was urgent. No, listen to me. We can't afford any mistakes. A pause. Because if this gets traced back to me, we're finished. Madison's blood ran cold. She had never heard her mother talk like this before. Lisa lowered her voice. Calloway doesn't even know what's coming. By the time this is over, he'll be the one behind bars. Madison's breath caught in her throat. What? She could barely believe what she was hearing. Her mother, kind, loving Lisa, was setting someone up? She pressed a hand to her mouth to keep from gasping. Then, slowly, she backed away from the office. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew one thing. Her mother was not the person she thought she was. Back in the courtroom, Lisa stood trembling, staring at the judge. The walls were closing in on her. She had worked so hard to keep the truth buried. But now, because of her own daughter, everything was about to come crashing down. The bailiff returned a few minutes later, carrying a folder. He handed it to the judge. Lisa's hands trembled. Please don't. The judge ignored her. He opened the folder and read. His eyes darkened. Then, he looked up, his expression unreadable. Ms. Bennett, he said slowly, is there anything you'd like to say before I make my decision? Lisa opened her mouth. But for the first time in her life, she had no words. The courtroom waited, breathless. And Madison, heart pounding in her chest, realized something chilling. She still didn't know the whole truth. And something told her. The worst was yet to come. The courtroom was silent. Lisa Bennett stood frozen in place. Her face pale, her lips slightly parted as though she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Madison's heart hammered in her chest. She had exposed the truth, or at least part of it. But the look on her mother's face told her there was still something she didn't know. The judge cleared his throat, his deep voice breaking the heavy silence. Ms. Bennett, I will ask you one last time. Is there anything you would like to say before we proceed? Lisa swallowed hard. Her hands trembled as she reached for the edge of the witness stand, steadying herself. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, Your Honor, I need a moment with my daughter. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Madison's breath caught in her throat. A moment with her? Why? The judge studied Lisa closely, his sharp eyes calculating. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he gave a slow nod. Very well. The court will take a short recess. He banged the gavel once. Bailiff, escort Ms. Bennett and her daughter to a private room. 2 guards stepped forward. Madison hesitated, glancing at the lawyers, the jury, and finally at Mr. Calloway, the man her mother had tried to frame. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, tired and sorrowful, met hers. She turned back to her mother, nerves twisting in her stomach. What could Lisa possibly say now? The guards led them to a small, dimly lit room with a single table and 2 chairs. A security officer stood outside the door, ensuring they wouldn't be left completely alone. Lisa sat down first, rubbing her temples. Her fingers twitched slightly, a nervous habit Madison had noticed since she was a child. Madison stood, arms crossed. What do you want to say? Lisa took a shaky breath. Maddie, you don't understand what you've done. Madison stiffened. I told the truth. Lisa's eyes snapped up, frustration flickering behind them. You think this is about truth? Her voice was low, urgent. You don't know what's at stake. Madison clenched her jaw. Then tell me. Because all I see is you trying to send an innocent man to prison. Lisa exhaled sharply. It's not that simple. Then make it simple, Madison shot back. Why did you lie? Why did you try to frame Mr. Calloway? Lisa hesitated. Her hands balled into fists on the table. Then, finally, she spoke. Because if I didn't, they would have come for us. Madison's breath caught in her throat. She took a step back. What? Lisa's eyes filled with something Madison had never seen before. Pure fear. They made me do it, Maddie, Lisa whispered. I had no choice. Madison's stomach twisted. Who made you do it? Lisa hesitated. Then, in the softest voice. The people who took your father. Madison felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She staggered back, gripping the edge of the table for balance. My father? Her voice was barely above a whisper. But he died in an accident. You told me. Lisa shook her head, her eyes glassy with tears. No, Maddie. That was a lie. Madison's entire body went numb. She felt like she couldn't breathe. Her father hadn't died in an accident. Her voice came out broken. Then what happened to him? Lisa squeezed her eyes shut. And then, with a trembling breath, she whispered, They took him. And now, they're coming for us, too. 14 years earlier. Lisa Bennett wasn't always a liar. She was once just a young mother, married to a man she loved, a man named Daniel Bennett. Daniel was brilliant. A scientist. He had worked for a research company that specialized in cutting-edge technology. He had always been secretive about his work, but Lisa never questioned it. Until the night he disappeared. Lisa had woken up at midnight to find their bedroom empty. The sheets beside her were cold. She checked the kitchen, the living room, the garage. He was gone. Her heart pounded as she reached for her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed his number. It rang once, twice, then static. Lisa's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. She called his workplace. No answer. She called his colleagues. No one knew where he was. Then, just as she was about to call the police, her phone buzzed. A single text message. Stop looking for him. If you know what's good for you, you'll forget he ever existed. Lisa's blood ran cold. She clutched the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She tried calling back. No answer. Tried tracing the number. Impossible. And that was when she realized. Daniel Bennett wasn't just missing. Someone had taken him, and they wanted her to forget. Present day, Madison's entire body shook. Her mind was spinning, trying to process what her mother had just said. You're lying, she whispered, but her voice was weak. Lisa shook her head. I wish I was. Madison swallowed hard. Who took him? Lisa hesitated. Then she whispered the words that made Madison's blood turn to ice. The same people who made me frame Mr. Calloway. A sharp knock on the door made them both jump. The bailiff's voice echoed from the other side. Court is resuming in 5 minutes. Lisa inhaled shakily. Maddie, I know you hate me right now, but everything I did, every lie, every secret, it was to protect you. Madison felt tears sting her eyes. Her father, her mother, Mr. Calloway. Nothing was what it seemed. And now, her mother was saying they were in danger? Madison felt like the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. Lisa reached for her daughter's hands. Maddie, listen to me, she whispered. No matter what happens in that courtroom, no matter what they say about me, you need to be careful. Madison swallowed. Why? Lisa's eyes darkened. Because if they know you've uncovered the truth, they'll come for you next. The courtroom doors swung open. Madison walked in first, her legs heavy, her heart pounding. Lisa followed, her head high but her hands trembling. The judge cleared his throat. Ms. Bennett, after reviewing the documents, I have come to a decision. Lisa inhaled sharply. Madison held her breath. The judge looked over his glasses. Then, in a voice that made the entire courtroom hold still, he said, Lisa Bennett, you are under arrest. The words, you are under arrest, hit the courtroom like a bomb. Gasps erupted. The prosecution lawyer stood, stunned. The jury exchanged shocked glances. Mr. Calloway sat frozen, his expression unreadable. But Madison? She couldn't move. Her legs felt like they had turned to stone, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Her mother, arrested? 2 officers stepped forward, reaching for Lisa's arms. Lisa didn't resist. She simply closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, and let them guide her forward. Her face remained calm, too calm. Madison's throat tightened. This wasn't right. She had wanted the truth to come out, but now, watching her mother being led away in handcuffs, something felt wrong. She jumped to her feet. Wait. The judge turned to her, frowning. Madison's hands clenched into fists. You don't understand. My mom, she didn't do this alone. Lisa's eyes widened, and for the first time, true panic flashed across her face. Maddie, no. But Madison didn't stop. She turned to the judge, to the entire courtroom, her voice shaking but loud. She's not the mastermind. Someone forced her to do it. And if you don't listen, if you don't stop them, she took a sharp breath. They'll come for her. They'll come for me. And they'll make sure the truth never comes out. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Then, the judge leaned forward. His face was unreadable, but his voice was sharp. Miss Bennett, who exactly are you referring to? Madison's heart pounded. She opened her mouth. But before she could speak, a loud noise shattered the courtroom. A gunshot. Screams erupted. The security officers lunged into action, pulling their weapons. Lisa's body jerked forward as the officers tried to shield her. Madison ducked instinctively, her pulse hammering in her ears. Another shot. Chaos. People running. Then, through the madness, a voice, low, deep, and terrifying. She should have kept her mouth shut. Madison's breath caught. She turned toward the courtroom doors. And standing there, in a crisp black suit, was a man she had never seen before. But something about him sent a chill down her spine. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a journalist. He wasn't anyone from this trial. He was someone else entirely. And he was looking directly at her. 2 months earlier, Lisa had been on edge for weeks. It started with late-night phone calls. Then, mysterious envelopes slid under their front door. And then, one night, Madison caught her mother staring at a letter with trembling hands. Madison had peeked over her shoulder. The letter was short. You have one choice. Do as we say, or we'll make you disappear, just like him. Lisa had gasped when she saw Madison reading it. She had snatched the letter away, stuffing it into her purse. Madison had grabbed her wrist, eyes wide. Mom, who sent that? Lisa had swallowed hard. Then, in a voice so small it barely sounded like her, she whispered, the same people who took your father. Present day, the courtroom was in chaos. The mysterious man in the black suit stood motionless, watching. Lisa was on the floor, an officer shielding her. Madison's ears were ringing. Her heart pounded. And then, the man smirked and walked away, just like that, as if he had already done exactly what he came to do. Madison's chest heaved. Her mother had been right. They were in danger. And now, Madison knew too much. She turned toward Lisa, toward the mother she thought she knew, and whispered, Mom, what have you gotten us into? The courtroom was in chaos. People screamed. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly. Security officers yelled into their radios, calling for backup. But Madison barely heard any of it. Her ears were ringing, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her mother, still in handcuffs, was staring at the man in the black suit as he disappeared through the doors. Madison turned to her. Mom, she breathed, her voice barely audible. Who was that? Lisa swallowed hard. Her entire body was trembling. But before she could answer, the courtroom doors burst open again. 2 new figures entered, both men, both wearing dark suits and earpieces. They moved with authority, their expressions stone cold. One of them, a tall man with short-cropped hair, pulled out a badge. FBI, he announced. Everyone stay where you are. A second wave of shock rippled through the room. FBI? What was happening? Madison's pulse quickened as the agents moved toward the judge's bench. They whispered something to him, something serious, because his face immediately darkened. Then, the agent turned and looked directly at Lisa. Lisa Bennett, he said, his voice smooth but firm. We're taking you into federal custody. Lisa's eyes widened. What? Madison's stomach twisted. No, wait. She was already arrested, she shouted. You can't just. The second agent cut her off. This isn't about Mr. Calloway's trial. He nodded toward Lisa. She knows why. Lisa didn't deny it. Her hands clenched into fists, her lips pressing into a thin line. And then, very quietly, she whispered, I knew this day would come. Madison froze. You knew? Lisa turned to her daughter, her eyes pleading. Maddie, listen to me. No matter what happens next, you need to trust me, okay? Madison's breath caught in her throat. Trust you? She echoed, her voice cracking. Mom, I don't even know you anymore. Lisa flinched. For a second, something broke in her eyes, something deep. But before she could say anything else, the FBI agents stepped forward. One of them reached for Lisa's arm. Let's go. Lisa turned back to Madison one last time. I love you, she whispered. Then, they led her away. 16 hours later, Madison sat on her bed, hugging her knees to her chest. She hadn't moved in hours. Her mother was gone. First, it had been the police arresting her in court. Then, before they could even process her, the FBI had swooped in and taken her away. No explanations. No details. Nothing. And now, Madison was alone. The house felt empty, like something had been ripped away. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Her stomach twisted. She hesitated, then slowly picked up. Hello. Silence. Then, a low voice. Smooth. Calm. Madison Bennett. A chill ran down her spine. Who is this? She whispered. The voice chuckled. That's not important. What is important is that you stop asking questions. Madison's grip on the phone tightened. Her pulse pounded in her ears. The voice continued, its tone dark. You think you've uncovered something important? You haven't. You're playing with forces you don't understand, little girl. Madison swallowed hard. She knew she should hang up. But instead, she forced herself to speak. What did you do to my father? Silence. A long, heavy pause. Then, a slow, amused exhale. Your father? The voice was mocking. Lisa never told you the whole truth, did she? Madison's breath hitched. What do you mean? A small click. The call ended. Madison stared at the screen, her entire body trembling. Her father, her mother, this trial. It was all connected. And now, she was in the middle of it. She sucked in a shaky breath. Then, slowly, she made a decision. She was done waiting for answers. If no one was going to tell her the truth, she would find it herself. Madison sat in the dim glow of her bedroom, her fingers clenched around her phone. The mysterious caller's words echoed in her head. Lisa never told you the whole truth, did she? Her entire body trembled. For 17 years, she had believed her father had died in an accident. She had mourned him, imagined what life would be like if he were still here. But now, everything had changed. Her mother had lied. Her father had been taken. And the people responsible? They were watching her. Madison shot up from her bed, her heart hammering. She couldn't sit here and do nothing. If she waited any longer, she might never find out what happened. Her mother was in FBI custody. There was no telling if she would ever get another chance to ask her what she knew. That left only one option. Madison had to start looking for the truth herself. And there was only one place to start. Her mother's office. The room felt colder than usual when she stepped inside. Lisa had always kept it neat. Bookshelves lined the walls, a sleek desk sat by the window, and file cabinets were tucked in the corner. But Madison wasn't fooled by the normalcy. Somewhere in this room, Lisa had hidden the real truth. She just had to find it. Madison moved quickly, her pulse racing. She opened drawers, rifled through papers, checked under the desk. Nothing. Then, her eyes landed on a small, locked cabinet tucked beside the bookshelf. Her stomach twisted. Lisa had never let her near that cabinet, which meant that's where the real answers were. She yanked the handle. It didn't budge. Of course it was locked. Madison scanned the room, searching for something, anything, that could help her open it. Then, she remembered. Her mother always kept a spare key hidden somewhere safe. Somewhere close. Her books. Madison's gaze snapped to the shelf. Lisa had always told her that books held the most important lessons. She would never just leave a key lying around. She would hide it in a place she trusted. Madison reached for the biggest, thickest book on the shelf, a leather-bound novel Lisa had once told her was her favorite. She flipped it open, and there, pressed neatly between the pages, was the key. Her breath caught. She grabbed it, her hands shaking as she turned back to the cabinet. With a deep breath, she slid the key into the lock and turned. Click. The door swung open. Madison's heart stopped. Inside the cabinet, stacked neatly, untouched for years, were letters. Dozens of them. She reached for one, her fingers trembling. The envelope was yellowed with age. The paper inside was fragile. She unfolded it carefully. And then, her breath caught in her throat. Because at the top of the letter, written in bold, precise handwriting, was her father's name, Daniel Bennett. Her vision blurred. She scanned the letter, her pulse quickening. Each word she read made her stomach twist tighter and tighter. Then, she saw one sentence that nearly made her collapse. If anything happens to me, tell Madison to find the black file. Madison's blood ran cold. What was the black file? And why? Out of everything, had her father made sure to leave those words behind? She grabbed another letter. Then another. The more she read, the more her chest tightened. Her father had known something. Something dangerous. And he had left clues. Clues meant for her. Her hands clenched into fists. Her mother had spent years trying to bury the truth. But Madison had just uncovered it. And now, she knew exactly where to go next. 30 minutes later, Madison stood outside the one place she never thought she would go. Mr. Calloway's house. The man her mother had tried to frame. The man who had been at the center of this case. The man who, if her father's letters were right, might know something about the black file. Her heart pounded as she approached the front door. She hesitated, then knocked. Silence. She knocked again. Still nothing. She turned to leave. And then, the door creaked open. Madison turned back. Standing in the doorway, his face unreadable, was Mr. Calloway. His piercing blue eyes studied her carefully. Then, in a low voice, he said, "I was wondering when you'd show up." Madison's breath caught. "What?" Calloway exhaled, stepping aside. "You're not the first one to come looking for answers, Madison." He met her gaze. "But you might be the last." Madison's heart nearly stopped. "You knew I was coming?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Calloway gave a slow nod. "I knew someone would come. I just didn't know if it would be you." A chill ran down her spine. "What does that mean?" Calloway stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. "If you want answers, you should come inside. But once you do, there's no turning back." Madison hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to turn around and pretend she had never knocked on this door. But she couldn't. Not after what she had read in her father's letters. Not after what she had seen in court. She needed the truth. Taking a shaky breath, she stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind her. The inside of Mr. Calloway's house was nothing like she had expected. There were no warm family pictures on the walls. No decorations. No signs of a normal life. Just papers. Stacks of them. Covering the table, the desk, even the couch. And in the middle of the mess, a single black file. Madison's breath caught. She pointed at it. "Is that?" "Yes." Calloway's voice was grave. "The black file." She swallowed hard. "What's in it?" Calloway sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Before I show you, you need to understand something. Your father wasn't just a scientist, Madison. He was working on something big. Something people were willing to kill for." Madison's stomach twisted. What was he working on? Calloway hesitated, then pulled out a chair. "Sit." She did. He picked up the black file, flipping it open. Inside were pages of documents, some typed, some handwritten. He pulled out the first page and slid it toward her. It was a government document. At the top, in bold red ink, were the words, "Classified, restricted access." Madison's pulse pounded. She skimmed the page, her hands trembling. She didn't understand everything. Most of it was written in complicated terms, but one thing stood out. Her father's name, Dr. Daniel Bennett, lead researcher, Project Eternity. She looked up. "What is this?" Calloway leaned forward, his expression grim. Project Eternity was supposed to change the world. Madison's throat tightened. "How?" Calloway's jaw clenched. "Your father was working on something revolutionary, technology that could erase and rewrite memories." Madison's breath hitched. "Erase memories?" She shook her head. "That's impossible." Calloway gave a humorless laugh. "Is it?" He gestured to the papers. "They were close, Madison. Closer than anyone thought. And when your father realized what this could mean, how dangerous it was, he wanted out." He exhaled slowly. "That's when they made him disappear." Madison's hands clenched into fists. Her father hadn't died in an accident. He had been silenced. She shook her head, her vision blurring. "Who are they?" Calloway hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "The ones who sent that man in the black suit." A sharp chill ran down Madison's spine. She leaned forward. Who was he? The man who shot at the courtroom. Calloway's jaw tightened. "They call him the Ghost." Madison's pulse pounded. "The Ghost?" Calloway nodded. "No one knows his real name. No records. No fingerprints. But if he's involved, that means one thing." "What?" Calloway's expression was grim. "You've got less time than you think." 20 minutes later, Madison sat in the passenger seat of Calloway's car as they sped through the dark streets. The black file sat between them. Her hands trembled in her lap. Everything she thought she knew about her father, her mother, even her own life, was unraveling. And now, she was being hunted by people who had already made her father disappear. She turned to Calloway. "Where are we going?" "To someone who might be able to help us," he said, his grip tight on the wheel. "Who?" Calloway hesitated. Then, in a low voice, he said, "An old friend of your father's." Madison's breath caught. Her father's friend? She thought her father had been alone in his research. But if there was someone else, someone who knew the truth, maybe they could finally get answers. The car took a sharp turn onto a deserted road. And then, a pair of headlights appeared behind them. Madison's stomach twisted. "Calloway," she said, her voice shaky. "That car." "I see it," he muttered. The headlights grew closer. Madison's pulse pounded. "Are they following us?" Calloway didn't answer. Instead, he slammed his foot on the gas. The car roared forward. The headlights behind them sped up. Madison's heart slammed against her ribs. "Calloway." Then, bang. The first shot hit the back of their car. Madison screamed. The second shot shattered the rear windshield. Glass rained down. Calloway swerved violently. "Hold on." Madison gripped the seat, her knuckles white. The car behind them was closing in. Then, another flash from behind. Another gunshot. Calloway yanked the wheel, the tires screeching. The car spun out of control. Madison's breath caught. The world tilted. Then, the car slammed into something. A brutal, bone-rattling impact. Madison's vision blurred. Her ears rang. And then, everything went black. Darkness. Then, pain. A deep, throbbing ache spread through Madison's skull as her senses slowly returned. Her fingers twitched against something rough, gravel. Her head felt heavy, her ears still ringing from the crash. For a moment, she couldn't remember what had happened. Then, gunshots. The chase. The crash. Her eyes snapped open. It was night. The wrecked car sat a few feet away, its front end crushed against a tree. Smoke curled from the hood. The windshield was shattered. Panic jolted through her veins. "Calloway." She pushed herself up, her body screaming in protest. Glass crunched beneath her palms as she staggered to her feet. Calloway was slumped over the steering wheel. Her chest tightened. She rushed to his side, reaching through the broken window. "Calloway, wake up." A groan. Then, slowly he lifted his head. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow, but his eyes, sharp and alert, focused on her. "We have to move," he rasped. Madison swallowed hard. "Are you okay?" "No," he admitted, wincing as he unbuckled his seatbelt. "But staying here isn't an option." Madison's pulse spiked. The headlights. The car that had been chasing them. Her eyes darted around the dark, empty road. The other car was gone. But that didn't mean they were safe. She took a shaky breath. "Where do we go?" Calloway wiped blood from his face. "We stick to the plan." He staggered to his feet, gripping the black file tightly in his hands. Madison's heart pounded. There was only one place left to go. 30 minutes later, they reached the meeting point, an abandoned warehouse at the edge of the city. The place was old, rusted, barely standing. The smell of damp wood and metal filled the air. Calloway limped toward the entrance, knocking twice on the heavy steel door. Silence. Then, a click. The door cracked open. Madison's breath hitched as a figure stepped into the dim light. A man, mid-40s, sharp eyes, a scar running from his jaw to his temple. He studied them, his gaze lingering on Madison. "You're Daniel's daughter." Madison's stomach twisted. This man, whoever he was, knew her father, and he had been expecting her. Calloway exhaled, his grip on the black file tightening. "We need answers, Beckett." Beckett's jaw clenched. Inside, now, the warehouse was lined with old machinery and dusty crates. Beckett led them toward a dimly lit office space in the back. As soon as they sat, he locked the door. Then, he turned to Madison. "Tell me what you know." Madison swallowed hard. "I know my father was working on something called Project Eternity. I know he wanted out. And I know—" She hesitated, her throat tightening. "He didn't die in an accident." Beckett's expression remained unreadable. Then, slowly he said, "No, he didn't." Madison's breath caught. "He was taken," Beckett continued. "Not just because he wanted out, but because he knew too much." Her hands clenched into fists. "Then where is he? Is he still alive?" Beckett hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "Your father is alive. But if we don't move fast, he won't be for much longer." Madison's world tilted. She felt like the air had been punched from her lungs. He was alive. Her father was alive. Tears stung her eyes. She had spent years believing he was gone, that she'd never see him again. And now, she had a chance to find him. She straightened, determination burning in her chest. "Where is he?" Beckett's eyes darkened. "In a facility run by the same people who tried to kill you tonight." Madison shivered. "The ghost?" Beckett nodded. "Him, and the organization he works for." Calloway leaned forward. "How do we find this facility?" Beckett exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "It won't be easy," he admitted. "The place is buried under layers of security. High-tech surveillance. Armed guards. If we're going in, we need to be smart." Madison didn't hesitate. "Then tell me what I need to do." Beckett studied her for a long moment. Then, with a small nod, he grabbed a map from the desk. He spread it out, pointing to a location circled in red. "This is it. The facility where they're keeping your father." Madison's heart pounded as she stared at the map. This was real. For the first time, she had an actual destination, an actual chance to bring her father home. Beckett's voice was low, serious. "We don't have much time. If they know you're looking for him, they'll move him, or worse." Madison's stomach twisted. She thought of the man in the black suit, the one who had tried to kill her, the one who was still out there, and he wouldn't stop until she was dead. She exhaled sharply. It didn't matter. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to stop now. She lifted her gaze, locking eyes with Beckett. "Tell me how to get inside." Beckett didn't respond immediately. He studied Madison, his expression unreadable, as if measuring her resolve. Then, with a sharp exhale, he pointed at the map. "This facility isn't just a building," he said. "It's underground." Madison's heart pounded. "Underground." Beckett nodded. "It's built beneath an abandoned government site, an old research lab that was officially shut down years ago. But in reality, it was repurposed, reinforced, and now, it's one of the most secure locations in the country." Madison's fingers tightened into fists. "And my father is inside." Beckett's jaw clenched. "Yes." Calloway leaned over the map, scanning it. "How many guards are we talking?" Beckett sighed. "A small army." Calloway cursed under his breath. Madison swallowed hard. "Then how do we get in?" Beckett hesitated, then tapped a narrow access point near the outskirts of the facility. "There's only one way inside without being seen," he said. "An underground service tunnel, used decades ago when this place was still an official government site. It was sealed off from the main entrance years ago, but if we can break through, it'll get us inside." Madison's stomach twisted. "And if it doesn't work?" Beckett's expression darkened. "Then we're walking into a trap." 3 hours later, the wind howled through the dark, empty landscape as Madison crouched behind an overgrown bush, her heart pounding. They had arrived at the abandoned research site. The facility loomed in the distance, a massive, shadowy structure surrounded by barbed wire fencing. Guard towers loomed over the perimeter, their searchlights sweeping the grounds. Madison's chest tightened. This wasn't just some secret lab. This was a fortress. Beckett crouched beside her, pressing a finger to his earpiece. "Still clear." Calloway's voice crackled through their comms. "For now, the patrols are on a 5-minute rotation. We need to move fast." Beckett nodded, then turned to Madison. "This is it," he whispered. "Once we go in, there's no turning back." Madison exhaled sharply. "I know." Beckett studied her for a moment. "You don't have to do this." Madison didn't even hesitate. "Yes, I do." Beckett gave a small nod. "Then let's move." They sprinted across the open field, staying low. Every second felt like an eternity. Every shadow felt like a threat. When they reached the tunnel entrance, an old, rusted grate hidden beneath a collapsed fence, Beckett wasted no time. He knelt, pulling out a crowbar. Madison's pulse spiked. The facility was just yards away. If they were seen now, it was over. Beckett jammed the crowbar beneath the grate and pushed. The metal groaned. The wind howled louder. Then, finally, the grate popped loose. "Go," Beckett hissed. Madison didn't hesitate. She slipped inside. The tunnel was dark, damp, cold. The air smelled of rust and earth. Water dripped from the cracked ceiling, and the walls were covered in faded government warning signs. Madison's breathing was shaky as she followed the narrow path, Beckett close behind. Up ahead, Calloway's voice crackled through the comms. You're almost there. Take the next left. Should lead you straight to an old maintenance hatch. Beckett nodded, gripping his flashlight. Got it. Madison's pulse quickened. If Calloway was right, this hatch would drop them inside the facility. She swallowed her fear. Then, they reached the hatch. Beckett wiped dirt from the metal latch, pressing his ear against it. Sounds clear, he whispered. Madison wiped sweaty palms against her jeans. Open it, she said. Beckett twisted the handle. Click. The hatch unlocked. Madison sucked in a breath, then climbed through. Inside the facility, the air changed immediately. It was sterile, cold. The floors were polished metal, the walls lined with security cameras and reinforced doors. Madison's chest tightened. They had made it inside. Beckett landed beside her, pressing his back against the wall. Calloway, we're in. Calloway's voice came through. Security room should be 3 floors up. You need to shut down those cameras before they spot you. Beckett nodded. On it. They moved quickly, quietly. Madison's heart pounded. They passed empty hallways, closed doors. Then, a sound. Footsteps. Madison froze. A guard. Beckett grabbed her wrist, pulling her into a dark corner just as the guard walked past. Her breath caught. The guard stopped, turned. Madison's pulse spiked. For a moment, just a moment, she swore he had seen them. Then, the guard walked away. Madison exhaled sharply. That was too close, she whispered. Beckett pulled her forward. Move. They crept down the hallway, finally reaching the security room. Beckett knelt beside the door, pulling out a small device from his pocket. A hacking tool. Madison blinked. Where did you get that? Beckett smirked. I have my ways. The device flashed. The door unlocked. They slipped inside. Beckett moved fast, typing into the mainframe computer. Madison's breath was shallow. Can you shut them down? Beckett cursed. No, but I can loop the feed. Seconds later, the camera screens froze. Beckett exhaled. We're good. Madison's hands clenched. Then let's find my father. They moved deeper into the facility. Every hallway was lined with reinforced doors. Then, they reached a lab. Madison's stomach twisted. Inside, through the glass walls, were dozens of empty hospital beds. Machines beeped softly, for drips still hung in place. But the beds, they weren't just empty. The restraints were broken, as if something had been here and escaped. Madison's chest tightened. What the hell was my father working on? Beckett didn't answer. Then, a voice, low, weak, coming from the end of the hall. Madison's heart stopped. She turned toward the sound, her hands shaking. Then, she saw him, a figure, curled in the corner of a locked cell. His hair was gray at the edges. His clothes were ripped and torn. But even in the dim light, even after all these years, she knew him. Her breath caught in her throat. Dad. The figure lifted his head, and Daniel Bennett looked at his daughter for the first time in 17 years. For a moment, time stopped. Madison's breath hitched as she stared at the man in the cell, the man who had been missing for 17 years. His face was gaunt, his skin pale under the fluorescent light. His once dark hair was now streaked with gray, and there were deep shadows under his hollow eyes. His clothes, nothing more than a thin hospital gown, were tattered and worn. But it was him, her father, alive. Madison's entire body trembled. Dad. Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. The man in the cell blinked slowly, his expression blank at first, as if his mind was trying to catch up. Then, recognition flickered in his tired eyes. His lips parted, a shaky breath escaping. Madison? Tears burned Madison's eyes. He knew her. He remembered. Her feet moved on instinct, but Beckett grabbed her wrist before she could rush forward. Wait. His voice was sharp, serious. Madison turned, glaring. That's my father. I know, Beckett said, his jaw tight. But we don't know what they did to him. Madison's stomach twisted. He was right. This place, this facility, had held her father captive for nearly 2 decades. Whatever Project Eternity had really been about, her father had been at the center of it. Madison swallowed hard. Then we need to get him out. Now. Beckett nodded, pulling out a small tool kit from his bag. He knelt beside the electronic lock on the cell door, scanning it quickly. High-level encryption, he muttered. This won't be easy. Madison turned back to her father. His eyes were still on her, flickering between hope and confusion. You shouldn't be here, he whispered. Madison's chest tightened. I came for you. Her father exhaled shakily, running a trembling hand through his tangled hair. "They'll come for you," he said, his voice hoarse. "If they know you're here." "They already know." Beckett cut in, working fast. "We need to move, now." Madison clenched her fists. She had come this far. She wasn't leaving without him. Then, a soft beep. Beckett cursed. "The system's alerting security." Madison's pulse spiked. "What?" Before Beckett could answer, a blaring alarm filled the hallway. In the security room, a man in a black suit leaned over a control panel, his cold eyes narrowing as the red intruder alert flashed across the screen. They were here. He reached for his earpiece. "Seal all exits," he ordered. His voice was calm, steady. Then, he turned toward the live camera feeds. The screens flickered, and there, he saw them. Madison Bennett, standing at the door of Daniel Bennett's cell. The ghost smiled. "Finally," he muttered. Then, he reached for his gun. Back in the cell, Beckett yanked the last wire, and the electronic lock gave a sharp click. Madison barely had time to react before the door slid open. Her father flinched as if expecting a trap. Madison rushed forward, grabbing his hands. "Dad, we have to go." For a second, he hesitated, his eyes darting between her and Beckett. Then, finally, he gave a small nod. They pulled him from the cell. But just as they turned the corner, gunfire exploded through the hallway. Madison screamed as bullets ripped through the walls. Beckett shoved her to the ground. "Stay down." Her father stumbled, barely able to keep himself upright. Then, a shadow appeared at the end of the hallway. The ghost, dressed in his signature black suit. Calm, controlled, a gun in his gloved hands, aimed right at them. Madison's breath caught. The ghost tilted his head, watching her closely. Then, in a smooth, quiet voice, "I should have killed you in the courtroom." A chill ran through Madison's body. Beckett pulled his own gun. "Go," he ordered. "I'll hold him off." Madison grabbed her father's hand. "Come on." Daniel stumbled forward, his legs weak. Madison dragged him down the hallway, her heart racing. Gunfire exploded behind them. Then, a sharp pain shot through Madison's arm. She gasped. A bullet grazed her shoulder. The burn was unbearable. She nearly collapsed. Her father caught her. Madison pushed through the pain. She wasn't stopping. Not now. They burst into a stairwell, their feet pounding against the cold metal steps. Up, up. Madison's vision blurred from the pain. But then, a voice echoed from the stairwell speaker. Cold, monotone. "Security breach detected. All exits locked." Madison's stomach dropped. They were trapped. Her father coughed, his body shaking. "They won't let us leave," he rasped. "Not alive." Madison's eyes burned. They had come all this way. She had found her father. She couldn't lose him now. She wouldn't. Then, a sudden bang from above. Madison whipped around. Footsteps. More guards. They were closing in. Madison grabbed her father's hand. She made a choice. There was only one way out. And it wasn't up. It was down. She turned toward the metal railing. And then, before she could second-guess herself, she jumped. Madison's body plunged downward. Wind rushed past her ears as she and her father fell through the stairwell, the metal railings blurring as they descended. For a terrifying moment, it felt like they were weightless, like time had slowed. Then, crash. They landed hard on a metal grate 2 floors below. Pain shot through Madison's side, but she didn't stop. Her father groaned beside her, struggling to move. Madison gritted her teeth, yanking him up. "We have to keep going," she gasped. Above them, the ghost's voice echoed. "Find them." Madison's blood turned to ice. She pulled her father through a dark maintenance tunnel, barely able to see. Her body ached. Her arm throbbed from the bullet wound. But they couldn't stop. They had to get out. Meanwhile, Beckett fired back at the ghost, ducking behind a pillar. He was running out of ammo, running out of time. The ghost was calm, methodical, every bullet precise. Beckett had been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. Then, he heard it, the whoosh of gas being released from the walls. His stomach dropped. They weren't just trying to catch them. They were going to kill everyone inside. He grabbed his earpiece. "Madison," he barked, "they're flooding the facility. You have minutes, maybe less." No response. Beckett's heart pounded. If he didn't stop the ghost here, no one was making it out alive. He inhaled sharply. Then, he made a choice. He dropped his gun, stepped into the open. The ghost's gun swiveled toward him. Beckett lifted his hand slowly. "You don't have to do this," he said. The ghost tilted his head. I do. Then, bang, a shot rang out. But it wasn't the ghost who fired. It was Calloway, standing behind the ghost. A perfect shot. The ghost staggered, his body jerking as the bullet hit his chest. For a moment, he stood still. Then, he collapsed. Beckett exhaled sharply. Calloway stepped forward, reloading. Didn't think I'd let you have all the fun, did you? Beckett smirked. Took you long enough. But there was no time to celebrate. The facility's alarms blared. They had seconds before the entire place went into lockdown. Beckett grabbed his radio. Madison, where are you? Deep inside the facility. Madison ran. She dragged her father through the tunnel, barely able to breathe. The gas was creeping in, thick, suffocating. Her vision blurred. Her father stumbled, his body weak. She wouldn't let him die here. She refused. Then, up ahead, a light, an exit. Her chest tightened. We're almost there, she gasped. But then, a figure stepped into the doorway. Madison's heart stopped. A guard. A gun aimed right at them. Madison's pulse pounded. She had no weapons. No way to fight. Then, a single gunshot. The guard collapsed. Madison whipped around. And there, standing behind them, was Beckett, a smoking gun in his hands. He exhaled sharply. Took you too long enough. Madison's chest heaved. She wanted to cry, to collapse, but there was no time. Move. Beckett barked. They rushed through the exit. Behind them, the facility doors sealed shut. And then, boom. The ground shook violently as a controlled explosion erupted inside. The facility was gone. 30 minutes later, Madison sat on the ground, her father beside her. The night was quiet. No alarms. No gunshots. Just silence. Calloway was treating her wound, pressing gauze to her arm. Beckett leaned against the wreckage, watching the last flames flicker out in the distance. Madison turned to her father. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, her father reached for her hand and squeezed. Tears burned Madison's eyes. She had spent 17 years thinking he was dead. But now, he was here, alive. And so was she. 1 week later, Madison sat at a small cafe, a cup of untouched coffee in front of her. Beckett slid into the seat across from her. Any word from the FBI? He asked. Madison shook her head. They still have my mom in custody. But she's talking. Beckett smirked. Figures. Madison hesitated. Then, do you think they'll come after us again? Beckett exhaled. Maybe. She swallowed hard. I'm not scared, she lied. Beckett gave a small smile. You should be. Madison clenched her fists. She had lost everything once. She wasn't going to let it happen again. Her father was free. Her mother was paying for her crimes. And the organization behind Project Eternity? It was burning. Madison took a deep breath. She didn't know what would come next. But whatever it was, she was ready.